Every idea, every story starts with a spark, a tiny light that glows. But to speak up, to be heard, to innovate takes courage. We're here to ignite that tiny spark. We're here to foster Canadian voices, our narratives, our ideas. We're here to spark courage. Our logo is a showcase for our culture, our storytellers, our innovators, and it reflects our creators and communities. The Spark is a catalyst to push boundaries, to drive the future, and for Canadian voices to be heard on a global stage.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the Future of Film Showcase 2021 edition, hosted by CBC Gem. My name is Zachary Goldkind, and I am the lead programmer of the festival. I'm very happy to be joined by Ella Morton for a small conversation about not only their film featured in our program this year, but their whole body of work, and ideally we'll be able to dig a bit into the core of their artistic practices. Ella, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah. How are you, Zach?
Doing very well. It's
Nice.
it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here.
Yeah, same here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Before we start off, I just want to apologize for the fact that most of my questions revolve around landscape. I'm quite obsessed with the subject. But to begin, your practice has been pretty consistent through what I've seen. From Deepest Darkness, Flaming Sun, to Kajanaqtuq, which is playing at this year's FOFS, to the descriptor I read of your upcoming project, The Great Kind Mystery. And this consistency offers me two questions, which I'm unsure whether or not you'd want to answer together. Landscapes, material manipulation, and voiceovers. These seem to be the three key elements of your work. The voiceovers, and please correct me if I'm wrong, open up a perspective to the land we see, its textures and stories. Perhaps the voiceovers you use act as that core connective tissue between the landscapes and the physical distortion, keen on evocation as an effect of the anecdotal's interaction with these images. These are just what I'm taking away, but for you, why landscape? Why the remediation of celluloid? I could even ask why celluloid and not digital?
I guess where to start with that. Well, first of all, I've come into filmmaking from still photography. I'm more of a photographer and visual artist to begin with. But yeah, in the last few years, I've expanded my practice into filmmaking. So the use of celluloid and of analog manipulations comes from things I've been doing with my still photography work. So yeah, I'm extending that experimentation into filmmaking. And so the three films that I've made so far are, I guess you could say, an extension of this project I've been working on for the past 5 years called The Dissolving Landscape, where I've been traveling to different northern and Arctic areas in Canada, in Northern Europe, and photographing or filming, capturing the landscape, trying to find ways to show both the sublime, the magical qualities of the landscape, and also the fragility or the uncertainty of its future, with climate change and everything. So I found that the film manipulation techniques were just a really superb way of expressing that those two different things, the sublime and the fragile. So yeah, so that's what that's where that experimentation came from, I guess you could say. And as for the voiceovers, and that I probably in the future, I might not make films in that format, but since I'm just getting going as a filmmaker, that's how I've worked it out so far. But the first film, so my other film, Deepest Darkness, Flaming Sun, that was the first one that I shot. I did this artist residency in 2016 in Svalbard, which is in the Arctic, but part of Norway. And so I went there. I mainly had in mind a project with photography, but then I did want to start experimenting with moving image. So I brought a bunch of Super 8 film and just captured stuff. I didn't really know at the time how it was going to take shape. And then I came home from that trip and didn't really know what to do with the film footage, just kind of sat there for a while. I tried a few things, couldn't figure out anything I was happy with. And then in 2019, I did a trip to Nunavut. Same thing, to capture the landscape. I really wanted to, after seeing the Arctic in Norway, I wanted to see the Arctic in my own country and really dig a little deeper into the differences in the landscape and the politics there. Svalbard doesn't have an indigenous population, so there's that huge difference and so much more to unpack with the Arctic here in Canada. So I was interested in that. So same thing, I went there, I took photographs, I shot Super 8 footage. And then that year in 2019, I was lucky to get a grant from the Canada Council for the Arts. So I had a bit more time to really think about how I was going to turn those two projects into films. So so I was really thinking about my own impression that the landscape left on me, but it didn't quite feel right to express that through my own voice or my own personal story, especially since I'm just going to these places for a limited time. I'm a visitor there and then I'm coming home. And so with Kajanaqtuq, I was really lucky to find an Inuk elder who lives here in Toronto, Naulak Ladru, who's the narrator of that film. And we talked about the project. She agreed to participate, and I did an interview with her, and she just had such amazing stories and such a powerful voice. So I decided that was the best pairing with my imagery. And that's how that film came to be. And then after I finished that film, I went back to my Svalbard footage, and a couple of colleagues who I did that artist residency with in Svalbard had done some interviews with the crew we went on this ship and sailed around for a couple of weeks. So some of the crew on the ship, and so I collaborated with them to get one of the guides on the trip to, they had an interview that they had recorded. So I used that for that film. And then, following in that same vein, when I found Naulak for Kajanaqtuq, I also ended up meeting this other woman, Amy Hull, who is going to be the narrator for my upcoming film, The Great Kind Mystery. So Amy is from Western Newfoundland. Her family are on one side Inuit who came down to Newfoundland from Labrador, and on the other side, Mi'kmaq, who settled on the west coast of Newfoundland. So she's got some amazing stories about her and her family's history there in Western Newfoundland. So yeah, so that's how it's worked out so far, with my filmmaking practice as it's starting out over the last few years. But we'll see. I think I'm interested in exploring different formats and approaches in the years to come. Yeah.
I mean, to jump on that quick. I mean, what interests you at the moment? I mean, like, especially like coming from like the visual arts practice and sort of like, I guess, working towards the malleability of film. What are you imagining for where you might want to go?
Good question. I guess I don't want to say too much yet, because I've just got many ideas floating around in my head for now. But I'm planning a trip to Antarctica, which hopefully I can do later this year, depending on travel regulations. Mm-hmm. So we'll see, but I've got some ideas with that will probably still involve narration of some kind, but probably not one single person. I still do want it to be about the land, but I can foresee it being about other things too. It's hard. Yeah, it's hard to give you a definitive answer right now.
But, of course. But I guess to stay on, I guess, the topic of these different landscapes, a question I had is, I mean, how do you, in representing these landscapes, see them distinctly through your camera? Like, is there a way you approach the film, the landscapes, as with the mediator of the camera in a way to make sure that they're, their own body that represents the fabric of their history?
Can you narrow that down a little more?
Of course. I mean, like, how is there a process that you go through, or like a process of even just like, thinking of mindset that you go through to approach these very different landscapes of, of Arctic region, and making sure that they are distinct and capturing their own histories and speaking for themselves as loud as the stories that are told, through the voiceovers?
As far as when I'm actually out there filming stuff, I think it's mostly an intuitive process of, I do research ahead of time and then also just talk to people when I'm there and try to kind of intuitively find what places seem to fit with, I don't seem to speak to me. And then, I go places, I wander around and shoot what speaks to me once again. And then, but I think that, like you say, having the land speak for itself or having it be fully represented and its history in the film, I think that comes in more with the narration and more in how everything works together in the post-production with the manipulation, the editing, and the narration. Especially in Canada for my film in Nunavut and the one coming up in Newfoundland, it was very important to me to have Indigenous folks be the narrators because I think that their voices are really important right now. We really need to listen more to them to find out the history of this country, the true history of it, and where we're going, what it's all about. So, so I'm really happy and honored to have them be participating and giving voice to the imagery that I've found. I think too, even though I say I'm mostly looking intuitively for imagery, with my next film, The Great Kind Mystery, I probably will be a little more specific when I'm there shooting. It would have been done already if it weren't for COVID and the travel restrictions in Atlantic Canada. But because I've had this extra time and I already have done an interview with Amy, the narrator for that one, I can kind of plan ahead a little more as to specific places I want to go and specific kind of images I want to get based on what she's talked about. So, so my process is still evolving.
To touch a little more on the process, could you perhaps speak a bit to that post manipulation of the footage, the sort of like how do you get in there? What are I mean, I know a bit about sort of perhaps some some bleaching, reticulation, some of those processes, but I'm really curious to hear sort of how you go about getting the effects.
Right. Yeah. The two things that you said are stuff that I've played with. And so far, some of my favorite effects are if I spray varnish on the film and then play around with bleaching it. Sometimes I'll kind of do a few cycles of it. So I'll varnish it, bleach it a bit, rinse it, and then spray again, bleach it again. And then you get kind of layers of the effect, or of the sort of stripping away of the different layers of the film, especially with color film. As you know, you've got the blue, yellow, and red layers. So the longer you bleach it, those each kind of sequentially disappear. And then, I've also sort of accentuated that bleaching and varnishing with just painting inks on them. I've buried the film in soil, and that eats away at it slowly. And I have tried reticulation, which I guess for viewers who don't know what that means, it's just if you boil the film, the emulsion will get kind of all gnarly. So I've tried that, and boiling it and then freezing it after. Although so far my films have been on Super 8, and I found that gets a little logistically tricky with the reticulation.
Very fragile.
Yeah. So I actually this year just got a Bolex camera. So I'm going to be trying to work with 16 millimeter, which I think you can do some of those effects a bit easier with. So we'll see.
Oh, that's thrilling. I'm very excited to see that. And I guess I wanted to just shift over to also just looking at, your practice between photography and film. And I want to ask if you perceive a difference between those practices, like how your still imagery and your moving imagery perhaps relate or don't relate, and what each of them have to offer to you singularly.
I think they do relate very closely. I mean, I have virtually the same approach to each of them. I'm going to these places, capturing images, and then manipulating them in one way or another, and having, as I've said, that manipulation show the magic, but the fragility, the uncertainty. So that's the same in both cases. And although I think they do add to each other or fill in things that each one can't do on its own, I guess you could say. With the photographs, I like how it's just this one image that you have to dwell on for a longer time. It leaves room for the imagination. It leaves room for you to wonder where that is, what it's about, what's going on, which is nice. But then again, with the films, it's more clear where the place is, what's going on. There's specific stories that are being broadcasted onto it. So that fills in some of that information, but which I guess leaves less room for your imagination to go places with it. But it gives you, in a way, there's more room as well, because it gives you more stories and more knowledge to work with. And so if that makes sense.
No, 100%, definitely. And then just a final question. I want to touch on your public exhibitions. And I wanted to just ask about sort of like how, I mean, relating to landscape, like what the utility of landscape is when you're sort of, creating this public exhibit. And I mean, I saw in one of them, you were using perhaps like, an open sort of landscape to sort of give a lot of like spatial coordination for the work. And I'm wondering how like using landscape almost as a canvas versus as a subject, sort of how that relates to your own work, and how you think about that.
Yeah. You mean like some of the public art projects? Yeah. Right. Are you referring to the meteor shower one?
Yes, that was definitely one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the most large scale public art project I've done. Same with film. Public art is something that I'm interested in, but still kind of getting into and yeah, experimenting with. But yeah, that project, Meteor Shower, I did it in 2015 and 16 in Denmark as part of this land art project there.
Mhm.
So yeah, so what it is a bunch of large stones that are painted with very high intensity glow in the dark paint and then just placed in a field. And so, yeah, it was meant to, it's a similar intention as the rest of my work, which is the landscape as this site where we confront mystery and the unknown. So you go into that space and these otherworldly glowing stones are there. And then is it from outer space? Are they some kind of alien thing? Or what? Are they meteors that have fallen from the sky? So yeah, it's the same intention, is to alter the landscape, make it different or unusual or mysterious in such a way that sparks people's imagination, or yeah, makes them reflect on the mystery that's
Mm-hmm.
there, the mystery that's everywhere. So yeah.
No, thank you for that, and Ella, I just want to say thank you for your work, and I think it's all provocative to a point, but also incredibly important. I think the stories that are being told through the way that you capture landscape, through the stories that you put on top of these landscapes to ensure that their histories are there and present, is very moving and again very important. So I want to thank you for that. Thank you for being a part of FOFS. And I'd like to let everyone know that please, Kajanaqtuq is on CBC Gem right now. Go watch it.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Zach.